Good afternoon, everyone. We're here this afternoon with Interfaith Explorers to have our new webinar for 2015. And this afternoon, we're going to be looking at relationships education and how we have conversations, how we handle conversations with parents and pupils. My name is Claire Clinton, and I'm an RE advisor down in Newham in the East End of London. And sat next to me is Jo Sell.
Hi, and I'm a research student doing my PhD in faith, relationships and young people, looking at how we can make SRE, RSE if you want to call it that, more faith sensitive in our secondary schools.
Thank you, Jo. Really appreciate Jo being here. She's got years of experience of leading lessons, particularly in a secondary context, but I think from her sort of teacher background as well, that there's many principles and things about handling this subject that that she's felt in the past and has overcome, and strategies to resolve things. So that's why Jo's being my critical friend here this afternoon. So thanks very much for coming. As many of you know, Interfaith Explorers is a website based resource that has lots of great materials for you as teachers to be able to use in your classroom. At present, there's materials particularly for Key Stage 2 children, supporting their learning in RE and PSHE and citizenship. So if you haven't checked out the teacher resources on the website, then please do. Just a couple of things about this webinar. If you're with us live, brilliant. Thank you for remembering we're on this afternoon. And if you see below where Jo and I are on your screen, there is a box where you can type in any questions you'd like to ask us. And we're leaving some time towards the end of this so that we can answer those questions. So if there's things that we're saying and it doesn't make sense, please send us a thing to ask us to maybe explain that again, or if you have a question, just jot that down. And out of sight, there's a few people here, and they will drop those down and pass them to us. There's also a PowerPoint presentation that goes with the webinar this afternoon. So I know some of you print that out and have that to the side, so you watch us with it at the side. For some of you, you may decide not to watch us, just to listen to us and to concentrate on that PowerPoint. We don't mind, Jo, do we?
No, we don't mind.
We don't mind.
Can I just say that if you are grappling with this subject in schools, then congratulations, because not enough people are. So I'm really glad that you're with us this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so just going to go through our session objectives. So first of all, we want to just go through with you about the law and some ideas around best practice, not breast practice, there you go. We're already into relationships education. Best practice around faith-sensitive relationships and sex education in schools. And Jo, why are we calling it relationships and sex education? Because the government still at the moment calls it SRE.
For years now, people working in the field, working with young people, have recognised the fact that actually when it comes down to it, it's more about relationships than it is about sex, especially when we're talking about primary school. So there's two issues there. One, why call it sex and relationship education when that's going to get everyone twitchy about teaching it in primary schools? And the other thing is, what are we saying to young people about what relationships are about if we put sex first and that is the main thrust of what we're saying?
It's going to be that sort of afternoon this afternoon.
So, you know, I think, you know, common sense says it needs to be relationships and sex education.
We're making the room laugh.
And actually, you know, there's been a select committee looking at this, and they have recommended that it becomes relationship and sex education. Some local authorities already call it that, and certainly I've been calling that. And I think you have too.
I have been
for
as
a
well.
number of years.
Yes, I was going to say for the last sort of 7 or so years, people have been using that phrase. So we're going to talk about relationships education, and so, you know, just so you know, that's why we're doing it, and that's what we've chosen to call it. We're going to think about some of the pitfalls and risks when we talk about leading faith-sensitive RSE, relationships and sex education in schools. And we're also going to do a little bit of exploring about how do you facilitate, how do you handle those discussions around faith-sensitive RSE. So that's our objectives this afternoon. And so we're going to use the PowerPoint as something that we can talk through with you. As I said, if you've got questions, then please do send them to us. So Jo, first of all, when we're talking about relationships and sex education in law, what is law for schools?
Well, they have to have a policy, and the governors are actually responsible for that.
Yes.
And I've been into schools where they haven't had a policy, where the governors have got no idea what on earth the policy might look like if they did have one. But I've also been into a lot of schools where they are really hot on it. The governors know all about their relationships and sex education policy and own it. And you've got parents on the governorship. So that really, I would say, is the really good way to go. You know, the guidance for schools says that it's the governors that have the responsibility for it in law, and if they're not taking responsibility, then they generally ought to.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I think the positive side of the law is it's trying to say this is something really important, which is why the governors have actually got a legal responsibility around it, because also there needs to be checks around it. I think we all understand when we're looking at this sort of thing that we're going to hit lots of different people's points of view, lots of different belief systems. And so as schools are a community, we've got to be able to come together and we've got to think about what's best for our young people, what's best for the children. And so listening to parents, listening, you know, to teachers, and also that wider group that's there in the governorship, drawn from the local community, is a sensible place to make those decisions, to work out what it is. And as Jo said at the start, if you're struggling with this, then that's in a sense a good sign, because it means you're asking the right questions, you're thinking about things. And that's what we want to encourage you to. Far too often, when we find something scary, we can back away, and that's not helpful. That doesn't lead to our young people being equipped with the information they need to know to make wise choices. And that's what we want. We don't want them to be damaged and hurt through relationship choices, whether they are sexual or not. There are plenty of relationships that can damage you that don't have a sexual dimension to them. And we want children and young people to pick up those skills. They're really important life skills. Jo and I hope that when we have our new government, whichever party that is, there'll be some changes around this. But at the moment, Jo, just tell us a little bit more about the SRE guidance.
Well, the guidance was put together in 2000. It's probably the oldest piece of guidance in schools. And the reason that it's so old is because nobody can agree on it, and it's all difficult, and they would rather just throw it away and sort of forget that it exists. But the Select Committee has done its stuff, and certainly if the Conservatives have their way, then the opt-out will stay, or at least the Select Committee have recommended that. But that it will become compulsory for schools to teach it. And if Labour get in, it will be compulsory. And they're also saying at this point that there won't be any opt-out for parents. So I think most people that I speak to, even from faith backgrounds, would say that there needs to be a lot of work done in schools on this. Because if it's done well, and if it's done faith sensitively, then it's information for life. It's not for now. We're not saying to young people, we know you're doing it, so there, use a condom. That's not enough. Sorry, I'm talking secondary now. We're not suggesting that you have
say that. It's primary. No.
But you know, there's a lot more to it than that. But you know, it's got to start in primary school, and it's got to start about what is good quality relationships and what they look like, and how children can actually look at a relationship and evaluate that to see whether they think it's because their friendships, you know, I see so many young children even, sort of, oh, but she doesn't like me anymore, my best friend's gone off with someone else. And, you know, there's so much work that can be done about that kind of thing in primary schools, let alone what happens in a secondary school.
No, absolutely. And so you'll see on the PowerPoint that we've put the main points from SRE and the guidance from the government at the moment. But it's really important that we're actually protecting children and young people from inappropriate materials, and there's lots of things out there. When as I think some of you have been before known, I was in a secondary school setting when I was a full-time RE teacher, and I can remember a DVD that came through to us in Essex to show, and instead of, we had a cartoon version of somebody having sexual intercourse, but this one decided no, that they would have real people having intercourse. And fortunately we looked at the DVD before we played it in year 9, and so we made that choice that this wasn't something that we would be showing in the school. So don't think that just because it's published, just because it's given to you for free, as that was a free resource that was sent into schools, it doesn't mean it's appropriate to be used. So we have to be critical around
absolutely. This is a very political hot potato. So there's people out there that are trying to push their own agenda, and we need to be aware of that. It doesn't matter where you come from, what your beliefs are, what your value system is. You need to be critical about whatever you show in schools. And this is your responsibility. You know, you're the teacher, you're the grown-up in that place, and you're the one that's expected to inform and protect the young people in your care. And the SRE guidance as it stands is quite faith sensitive, but it will change quite dramatically, I think. And probably rightfully so, because it's very out of date and quite discriminatory in some ways. But at the same time, there are organisations that produce brilliant stuff, and they also produce stuff that I wouldn't use in school. So just because you've had one really good resource from one source, don't assume that everything they produce is excellent either. So, you know, use your common sense, guys. You know, you're the teacher, you're the trained person, and you know what is good for your class. You know what is sensitive to the makeup of your community. And you're responsible for making sure that the stuff that is shown in your class and used in your classroom is first class. Because actually, our children and young people deserve the best. And that's our responsibility as teachers, to try and give them the best that we can.
Yeah, thank you, Jo. Okay, thinking on a little bit further, we're going to just think about some potential pitfalls that can happen with SRE. You've already heard terminology can be a potential pitfall, and less so, I would imagine, at primary, but very much so at secondary. You have to be very careful about how you say things and how you phrase things.
But if you get things wrong, then the whole class has a laugh, and actually that's a really good place to start.
It's a relief point at times,
isn't it? It's a really good place to start with relationships and sex education.
Okay, so potential pitfalls. At the moment, as far as the law's concerned, parents can withdraw. They can't withdraw, as many of you know, from the science, the physiological part of sex education, whether that's talking about animals or whether that's talking about humans, but they can withdraw from the relationships part of education, which always seems the wrong way round. If there was any withdrawal to happen, you actually want them to know about relationships and how to do it well. But anyway, that is one of our possible pitfalls, that parents are not happy because they don't understand what we're trying to do as a school. They think that it is what we've said about handing out condoms or telling 2-year-olds, you know, about a man having an erection, all sorts of things. Okay, and there's lots in the press at times of unhelpful stories around these things. And you know what? Yes, there will always be bad practice somewhere, but that doesn't mean that that's true for the majority of places. And in fact, there's some really great practice that often doesn't make the newspapers because it's not the story that's going to sell. And so we have to be mindful of what's going on in the media. And actually, it's a business, and bad news, unfortunately, does sell much better at times than good news. So knowing the information, what's right to give children and young people at different stages and ages. And I think there is a complexity around that, Jo, with emotional sort of maturity of pupils, because you can have in your classroom some very mature pupils and some very immature pupils around relationships. And so handling that in a way does take sensitivity, and it does take some expertise. But I think I've said to you before, you know, in your school, find the teachers who are good, that you know form good relationships with pupils, appropriate relationships, not ones where they're going to be their best buddy, but ones where there's a healthy respect and understanding, where pupils do listen to them and do they help pupils to think through an issue. And just ask them the questions where you're struggling sometimes. You know, if you've got a particular class, and classes, as you know, from one year to another can be very different things. Yeah. You know, talk to other people about it. We're professionals, we have that ability, and we're not in this on our own. It's a whole school community tackling this.
Absolutely. And the thing is that you will know the teachers that would be good to deliver some of this, and maybe that means that you send them on specialist courses.
Yeah.
So that they are really genned up to know what exactly the facts and the figures and everything else are, and that they're not left in the front of the class sort of blathering on about stuff and not really knowing what they're talking about.
Yeah, that's so important. And I think another potential pitfall is that we get so worried about offending people that actually we don't deliver what the children and young people need. In relationships education, that we make it so bland and so inoffensive to everybody that actually it doesn't help them. And the point of this education is to grow them and to get them ready for life in 21st century modern Britain, as the government likes that phrase at the moment. And modern Britain is a place where sexuality is used to sell just about everything. Have a look at any advert and you will always find some beautiful airbrushed woman selling you or sitting on the car or whatever it is. So they're not living in a neutral society around how they look, about how other people see them, about self-worth, and how that's related to how they look. And within that as well, if we don't understand what religions teach on relationships and on sexual practice, then again, schools can feel, or communities around schools who are part of that school, parents, can feel a sense of alienation. Actually, when you know what somebody believes, it's not about you having to agree with it. It gives a bridge, it gives a way in to show respect. And often that's a starting place. So by not addressing that, and we've seen that at times in schools, and there was a project that Jo and I worked on about 7 years ago that flowed from some concerns from pupils. And a lot of that was about professionals as well as parents not understanding.
And not respecting.
Yes.
That was the big issue. Kids will allow you to not understand. They'll fill you in if you ask the right questions, but not respecting the fact that they're different, or that they may see things differently to you, is unforgivable in a classroom.
Yeah.
That is not what you're called to be. You are called to be someone that may disagree with a lot of what is said, but still respects the views of those young children, or the families that they come from.
Yeah.
Because the thing is that, one girl I was talking to a little while ago, she was saying, yeah, my religion's important to me, not because it's a personal religion of mine, but because it's important to my family. And so we will have a whole raft of young people in our classrooms, some of which are not religious at all, some of which are struggling with their religion and the whole different dynamic that there is within the family and within the community. Others will be very religious and be very upset if you disrespect their religion. And then what you do is you force a gap between you and them. I'm not saying you need to be their friend, but by showing respect, you are much more likely to get respect If they respect you, they will come and talk to you when they really need it. And one of the things that I found is that teaching this means that young people will see you as a place to come and talk. And that's really important, and that is a real privilege for a teacher to have.
Absolutely. So thinking about some of those possible pitfalls, they give us a challenge ultimately. And you know, relationships education is challenging, but as Jo said, the rewards of that, of seeing young people and children grow up making positive decisions, then that's a really great thing. I'm just taking my phone off the hook and I'm putting it back down. Okay, that's not happened before, has it, on a live broadcast?
And
there we are, something new, and we turned off all the mobiles. There you go. Right, so the challenge we have is about then involving parents and thinking about things in an inclusive way. So, so Jo, how do we turn that round? How can we do that positively?
By talking to the young people and to the children, because they will fill you in. They will tell you. They will be quite happy to let you know exactly what they think, what their religion feels, and everything else. And once you've got it out in the open, you can explore that with them.
Yes.
You can say, yes, many Christians or many Muslims might agree with you, but there is a different way of looking at that, and this is what it is. Or you might say, yes, well, you know, some people feel that lots of teenagers are sexually active, but actually the figures are this, or whatever. And you can, by opening them up, you can then deal with the situation, you can deal with the issues the way they see them. Because we can decide what we think is important and get on with it, but if it doesn't touch where they're needing to hear and understand, then there's no point in us doing that. And I guess with primary, you know, you're talking about building blocks of relationships. Friendships are really important when you're little. Really, really important. And for a lot of them, they'll have fractured relationships. And you can teach them. You can work through things with them in a way that helps them to expect positive relationships and to understand what you should get from a relationship, so that if a relationship is not like that, then they will realise and see it for what it is.
No, that's really important. So our second possible pitfall was around sort of not knowing the right information. And particularly when we're talking about faith-sensitive relationships education, we've put over the next few slides a number of bits of information taken from sacred texts. I'm not going to go through them now, but you can have a look through those in your own time. But just to say that sacred texts all do speak about sexual practice, and they do talk about what good sexual practice would be, and whether that's in Buddhism or whether that's in Hinduism, where we have as the sacred text the Kama Sutra, which always amazes many an RE pupil in year 8 or year 9, that the idea that one of the goals of human life is for pleasure, and sexual pleasure is part of that. And so this is part of the scriptures that's been written to teach men and women how to give pleasure to one another in that committed marriage relationship. So whether you're talking about in the Torah, the Jewish scriptures, the fact that, oh, we've had lights go on. Sorry, there's been a power cut here. So there we are. We've got lights on. We look different now, don't we? Not as bright, I feel.
Never mind.
Anyway, so, and there's the Song of Solomon. And traditionally, boys were not allowed to read that until they'd gone through their bar mitzvah, until they become a man. Because actually it talks about this relationship between a potential bride and groom, and all the many sexual tensions that are going on before that, and all their imaginings of how they're going to pleasure one another through that. So there's quite a lot about sex there, let alone things that Christians are told within the New Testament as well. So to think that Islam hasn't got anything to say about sex that's positive is our lack of knowledge. And some of that comes from media, some of that comes from our own lack of education. As Jo said earlier, it's really important as teachers that we do improve our own professional development. And so we've put those slides in just to show you that there are some positive things. I can't write loads of them, but we tried to put in something from every sacred text so you could see that those relationships are important. Just to say as well, for those 6 major religions in the UK, all of them see that within a committed relationship. Most of that, because of the time when that was written, we'll talk about marriage. Yeah, that they're, where they're saying about not having sexual relationships outside marriage, it's seen as a sign of protection, not trying to be a killjoy in any way, because there's the idea that sex is good and it is pleasurable and it deepens love and it develops a friendship and makes it into a very special friendship, but also it makes you very vulnerable. And so the reason why those teachings are within marriage, within a committed relationship, is a sense of protecting the individual. Because it can destroy you, it can rip you apart. And the idea in faith, with the idea of God, is that he wouldn't want that to happen to you. He wouldn't want you to experience those bad things. Anything you want to add to that, Jo, or is that a bit of an overview?
Yeah, I think
it's a bit of an overview.
What I would say is not only finding out about the whole faith side of things, but also your facts and figures.
Yes.
Because so often people don't want to talk about sex. They don't want to talk about relationships. And mostly it's because they don't know.
Yeah.
And they don't understand the risks. And if they do, they don't want to talk about it. And so I would really encourage people to get trained up to deliver the content. If you were a geography teacher, you would expect to be trained up to teach that. If you were a maths teacher,
there would be some knowledge that you need to know.
There would, and there is for relationships and sex education too. So often it, in the same way as sometimes RE, is kind of taught by tutors or whatever, and they don't want to do it. And I've done training for tutors, and they sit there and you can see the ones that want to deliver it and the ones that really wish you'd go away because they don't want to be challenged about it. And so, you know, I would say choose your staff, train them up, and make sure that, you know, people are doing a good job. Because, like I say, they deserve the best. Our kids deserve the best.
They do. Okay, so we're going to move on now to our top tips for teaching relationships education. So first of all, I'm going to say just about involving parents is really important. There's a quotation on the PowerPoint slide, which I won't read out to you, but many parents will have a false idea about, if you say you have got this relationships education coming up, as to what it is. And actually that dialogue with home is so important, because actually if you can keep them open to listening to what you're doing, they're often very pro what you're doing as a school, because you know their children and you know what you're trying to build in, as Jo's talked about earlier. So it's really important not to get fearful of parent reaction, but also to use right terminology. The reason we're talking about relationships education, we've taken sex, that word, out of it and put it later, is because if you have that first, as Jo said, the parents will think that you're pushing a particular agenda. And whether you are religious or not, there are not parents of my friends' children's of my children, their parents are not wanting them to get into sexual relationships, and that's nothing to do with religion. You know, they're not wanting that. So actually we need to take that on as schools and understand actually our terminology is important. We need to meet with parents. We need to allow them to say their things that they're concerned about and put those to rest. In my son's primary school, which is where we're transmitting from today, though they're no longer here, I can remember when they first started having meetings. And when they first started having those meetings to talk on an annual basis of what they were going to do in each year group, oh, it was very fractious. But actually, after we'd done the first year and we understood what it was about, the second year we were able to ask some more questions. And that really helped my husband and I to be one step ahead of the school and to be able to then decide what information we wanted to talk through with our children before they had those conversations in school, and actually to know what was coming in school and what was appropriate and what wasn't, and really helped us as parents to have those conversations.
Yeah, the other thing with it is that it then gives parents a chance to have their say.
Yeah.
And my experience of parents, you might get difficult parents, but on the whole, my experience of parents is that they want what's best for their kids.
Yes, absolutely.
And if you can show them that you're delivering the best for their children, they'll be 100% behind you. And if you cut them out, if you make them feel disenfranchised, then that is where you get your stress and strain,
yes.
because they will believe what the Daily Mail says.
Yes, they will.
They will. And then you've got all sorts of problems. You know, take your governorship along. You've got parent governors on your governorship. If you can talk to them and help them to understand what it is you're doing, then they will support you.
Yeah.
And they will talk to the people in the playground that are going, oh, have you heard?
And they're very effective at that.
You know?
Yes. Yes.
And this is a partnership.
Yeah.
Teachers with young people and children, and parents and governors and the local education authority or whoever. It's a partnership. And the more we work together, the better we can deliver for our young people and children.
Okay, so we're going to go to questions in just a moment. So if you've got any, then do write them in. But we're just going to finish off the last few bits thinking through this. So the other thing that we've said about top tips is obviously making sure that you have a workable, up-to-date policy that's overseen and ratified by your governors. We've mentioned that earlier. Also that you are ensuring that there is strong professional development happening for members of staff, because you're not going to get past the fear of handling this in the classroom unless there's been that, are you, Jo? That's always going to be present.
No.
And I think even when you've had it, it still can feel a little bit scary.
Yeah.
Until you've done it a few times.
And also, you know, you're confident to handle anything that is thrown at you, because it is difficult. And, you know, certainly in the secondary sort of realm, you will be tested.
Yeah.
When someone turned around to me and said, so miss, are you HIV positive then? And I thought, okay, I can say that's a personal question. You shouldn't be asking that and get on my high horse. Or I can say something that's going to help them to understand something more about HIV, but at the same time, totally deflate them. And I said, well, that's funny you should say that, because I don't know for sure. I don't think I am. There's nothing in my history or symptoms or anything that says that. But at the same time, what I'm conscious of is that, did you realise that a third of people that are HIV positive don't know? So it was a teaching point.
Yeah.
And they totally got, you know, they wanted to embarrass me, and it didn't work. So the more confident you are with your content and just delivering it in the class, the better you'll be at doing what teachers do best, which is educating young people.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've said about bespoke resources, thinking about just because of one thing comes from somebody doesn't mean it's the best for somebody else, and that you have to keep looking at those things and thinking about those things. And we want to make those best choices for our pupils. So in terms of our key principles that we're saying to you is continue to be a good student. There are facts, there are things to learn out, and they do change all the time. For instance, the young people at the moment, all the recent research is saying actually they're not going out and drinking and doing the same things as the previous generation have done, because they are on their internet, whether they're playing Xbox or whatever it is. It has changed their behaviour, this new thing as part of their life. And so we've got to be really careful that we stay up to date, and knowing those figures is really important. Not talking about things that are 10 years ago, 5 years ago even, to know those up to date things. Really be analytical about the ideologies, because there are many different ideologies that are created resources that will come to you. And we're just saying to you, pick and choose the best that work for your school. And you know, that is a discussion that can go to governors. They can be part of some of that process of thinking through what's best. And again, that builds up your resilience as a school to be able to know why you're doing what you're doing and why that's right for your young people going through that. Having parents, as Jo said, on governors, involving them, involving members of the community is really important. And seeing the big picture of where we're wanting to get children and young people to in their relationships is really important. We've got a couple of things on the PowerPoint where you could go and get some more support and resources. Jo's organisation that she's worked for, delivering faith-sensitive lessons in schools, has a young person's website. But actually, I think for teachers, particularly if they're looking around wanting to know more about religions and views, there's a whole load of really good materials on there that you've worked with different faith leaders. And so there's a section for that. So that's the FRIT website, and would encourage you to go and have a look at that. Also, I have a publication called Body and Soul, which I think is fantastic for year 5 and 6, faith-sensitive relationship education. And I would encourage every school. It sounds expensive because it's £30, £37.50, but you get a DVD which has got films and all sorts of things really on it, and you can have all the materials printed and everything's on there. So it's great. You've got stuff for your interactive whiteboards, everything on there. So I would really say that as well for a primary setting. So we're needing to wrap up a little bit before our people to the side start telling us off for having talked far too long. As you know, Interfaith Explorers is here to support you and to provide with you lots of films and resources to help you understand more about different faiths and be able to handle those interfaith conversations at the chalk face in the classroom. So do have a look for those other resources that are on there. And as always, if you're watching this not live but later on, if you have a question, you've got the details for emailing that through to Roxana, and she'll pass that on to Jo and I, and we'd be delighted to come back to you as you've had. So Jo, question today: how do you deal with disagreements between pupils in the classroom?
Well, it doesn't matter what you teach, you're going to have disagreements in the classroom. If you do politics, if you do ethics, if you do sociology in the class, if you just do playground duty, you're going to have to cope with disagreements with pupils, and it's no different in RSE than anything else. You always show respect to all views, but you point out that there may be a different view, and you point out the reasons for that. And as long as you show respect and care for every single view there is, then you have a way of dealing with that. And you know, sometimes I've heard teachers really sort of be heavy on stuff, but if you say a thing, I mean, another question that's coming up is about homosexuality, which is always a hot potato in the classroom. But if you get a child that says, well, in our religion homosexuality is wrong, and you say, well, I disagree with you, what does that say? No. That doesn't help. It doesn't give any information. It doesn't show a different view necessarily. You say, well, you know, some religious groups feel that, and other people feel this, and they feel it because of that. And actually, the government have said, I'll answer this one at the same time. The government have said that there is an equality with people who are homosexual, in the same way as we would expect to see equality with people that are black, Asian, white, it doesn't matter. And we would expect to see that with religious groups as well. Now, that is the country that we live in, and that is the law. And, you know, that is something that as teachers we can't go against. But we can acknowledge that not everybody feels the same about that. But that there is also things that protect people that are different, whether they're disabled, whether they're homosexual, whether they're women, whatever that is. And we have to respect that and uphold that within the classroom and explain why that might be. But to totally shoot someone down for a view doesn't help.
Well, it switches them off from your lesson.
And it also pushes it underground.
Yeah.
And actually it's much better that it all comes out in the classroom and then we can look at it and deal with it and talk it through in a respectful way. We
often talk about in RE, Jo, that the goal is to grow pupils up so that they can disagree agreeably.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think it's that same skill here that we're talking about, that we want to see pupils that may hold very different views about something like homosexuality, being able to respect each other's views and understand the reasons behind those views, but also understand the law of the land that we live in as well. And that people have to work things around that. Yes. And so the reality is that no one keeps us here. We make a choice to be here, and we decide the government. We have a vote. We live in a democracy, and those things, that outworking of that, can be tough for children at points.
And grown-ups.
And grown-ups, yeah, that's very true. Maybe more so at times, but it's still good and it's still important. We had a question about engaging girls in relationships education, particularly young girls. I've always found that sort of girls are sort of very much aware of relationships and can be quite analytical about relationships, not always mature around them, but are desperate for them, much more than boys, who will sort of have a fight and argument and then they'll go back to playing football again, whereas girls, things can fester. So I tend to find that girls within something like relationships education, particularly at primary school, have been very keen to understand how to make good friendships and how to resolve problems. Sometimes that might be from a selfish perspective because they're trying to see how they can get their own way, but it still worked and they've always been engaged. I think, again, finding those questions that are open questions that involve everybody, always engage people. So your starters are important.
I can't help but wonder whether this is done from a particular aspect, because my experience is that girls are always really wanting to get involved in RSE. I don't know whether they're talking about girls that might feel overwrought in a mixed classroom.
Okay.
Or,
yeah, it could be that.
You know, and I have been in classes where girls from quite a strict religious background have struggled to talk on the same kind of level. But I think if you do understand the religion that they come from and say, look, your religion says that sex is important, and certainly at secondary level, we can have a laugh about, you know, those parents that, you know, are saying just don't do it at the moment. Again, you know, they will be the same grandparent or same parents that are saying, well, why aren't you getting on and giving me grandchildren? And it's the same physical act, but that's why we're giving information now. Because it's not information for now necessarily, it's information for life. And that's a really important message to get across, because we're not just educating people, young people, children for right now. If we talk about contraception in class, are we saying, well, we know you're doing it, so here, use this? No, that's not at all what it's about. It's about saying at some point you might become, you probably will become sexually active, and we want to give you the skills and information and knowledge that will help you best navigate those relationships when they come along.
Absolutely. Okay, we've got more questions coming in, but I know our time really is up. So Jo and I might sort of do some answers to these other questions that have come in. Thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. Thank you so much, Jo, for coming. It was lovely to do this with someone again. So you added into my friends who have been with me on these webinars. So thank you, and we hope you have a great rest of the week, a lovely weekend when you get there. And remember, if you do have more questions, then do just send them in to us. We're very happy to try our best to give you some answers to those. Okay. Bye for now. Bye.